Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today in person and online. I'm very glad to be able to give a talk here today about my ongoing PhD project. And as you might already know me, I'm co-organizing the SLLAT seminars, and you might know me from my emails, weekly emails. So I'm a second-year PhD student, and today I'm going to talk about the first two experiments of my PhD project. And your feedback would be really appreciated because we are planning on further studies and experiments. So for today, I'm going to give a brief introduction about the general idea of my PhD project, and then talk about the two experiments and what findings we have in hand now. So let's get started with the introduction. So as you know, second language learners, they can rapidly pick up new words, novel words from the environment, and most of the time they are not explicitly being taught. So, and most of the time they are not fully aware of the knowledge they acquired. So it's kind of implicit learning process. This is amazing because we have a highly variable environment. So here's an example of the classic gavagai problem. So imagine you see someone pointing towards a rabbit and say gavagai. What does it mean? What does the word gavagai mean? It could mean anything in the environment. It could mean a rabbit, the motion of the rabbit, anything in the environment. So that's what we mean, a highly variable environment, a highly variable context. So you need to figure out what it means from the context. And in L2 learning, this is not the whole story. We have something else. So we have potential difficulties like coming from non-native sounds, non-native phonology. So imagine someone speaking English talk to you. They say ship. What does it mean? Does it mean the animal or the boat cruise thing on water? If you don't accurately discriminate between sheep and ship, the E and A vowel contrast, it might be confusing. So why is this a problem actually? It could be perceptual difficulties. So perceptually you couldn't hear the difference. You just think the two sounds are the same. Or it could be a problem at the phonological level. So you hear the trivial differences between the sounds, but you don't categorize them into different phonological categories. Or there could potentially be attentional biases, for example, coming from your previous language learning experience, your L1, any languages you learned before. So, given these difficulties, how is this implicit word learning achieved? How is it possible? One possibility by Nick Ellis is that he talks about implicit telling, which means learners can keep track of linguistic information across multiple learning trials, which is usually an unconscious process. They're not aware of that, but they can keep track of the information. So we would like to look at this using a paradigm called cross-situational word learning paradigm. In this paradigm, learners could keep track of the information across learning trials or situations, and they accumulate these informations and use them to learn the words. There are several studies looking at the paradigm already, and here is one classic paper by Yu and Smith, and I explain how the paradigm works. So, in this study, the authors trained participants with uncommon objects and pseudowords. They wanted them to learn words. And they set up different conditions here. In some conditions, they had 2 pictures presented with 2 words, or 3 pictures with 3 words, and 4 pictures with 4 words. This creates a kind of ambiguity. So if you see multiple pictures and multiple words, you don't know which one means which. It's ambiguous. And so here is an example. Imagine you see two pictures like this. You see two objects on the screen, and you hear this. Playing.
It's because you're muted.
Can you hear it?
Maybe you. Why don't you just say that?
Yes. Okay. So if you see, the two pictures and you hear two words, 球棒, you know which one means which? They're played in random order, so you don't get it. It's ambiguous. And if you get another trial, in this situation, you see another two pictures, and you hear another two words, 狗, 球. Now there's a word that occurred again with the ball. So this kind of co-occurrence over time, you keep track of it, and over time you get which picture means what. So this is the basic idea of cross-situational learning. And this is a two picture by two words condition. And imagine we have three, four pictures and more words. The conditions get more complicated. And what they found is that adult learners, they could learn novel words in this kind of ambiguous context. And as in the graph, in all conditions, they could be above chance after a short learning. So this is the basic idea of cross-situational learning. And what about phonology in this learning process? So previous studies mostly used phonologically distinct words. And these words are usually follow participants' L1 phonotactics. So for example, in this paper by Monaghan et al., they used pseudo-words based on English. So baguette and binda, these words could potentially be English words. They follow English phonotactics, and they use English phonemes, so they sound familiar to English learners. But what if there's non-native sounds? What if the words sound more similar to each other? Because in L2 learning, we have found the impact of phonology is significant, so we need to take into account this. And there are some studies looking at this role of phonology in cross-situational learning already. So this one by Escudero et al. In 2016, they looked at minimal pairs in cross-situational learnings. So what they did, similarly, they show two pictures with two words. The words are played in random order. And they created different conditions by manipulating the phonological similarity between words. So in this first case, it's a non-minimal pair case where you hear dit and bon. The two words sound different. And in this kind of trials, a vowel minimal pair trial, you hear two words that differ in vowel only. So dut and dit. They differ in the vowel. And there's a consonant minimal pair where the two words differ in consonants only. So they tested this and they asked participants to choose the correct reference for the words after learning. What they found is adults can learn minimal pairs. So even though words sound very similar, they could still be above chance after learning at identifying the word picture mappings. And they also found that for the vowel minimal pairs, it was a bit harder than the non-minimal pairs and the consonant minimal pairs. So this provides evidence for the effect of phonological similarity in cross-situational learning. And I have to emphasize that this study, they recruited English participants to learn the English pseudo words. And a more recent study by Escudero et al. This year, they used the same words, same materials with L2 speakers. So here the participants are Mandarin natives who speak English as a second language, and they are advanced English speakers. So they want to see how, if and how L2 learners perform in this kind of task. And authors predicted that for the L1 group, it should be the same as the previous experiment. And for the L2 group, they should also perform a little bit lower at the vowel minimal pairs compared to noun and consonant minimal pairs. And this is because of the L1, L2 phoneme inventory. So in Mandarin and English, the vowels should pose a greater difficulty because, like I said, the E and I and U contrasts, they don't exist in Mandarin. So they predicted that vowels should be harder. And what they found is that overall, the English group, the L1 group, performed better than the L2 groups. So the dark green bars are the English native group. And for the English native group, they found a similar pattern as the 2016 study. So vowel minimal pairs had lower accuracy than consonant and non-minimal pairs. However, for the L2 groups, for the Mandarin native groups, I didn't find significant difference across minimal pair conditions. So this was not what they predicted, because as I said, if for Mandarin learners, the vowel contrasts should be harder than the consonant and non-minimal pairs. And the authors explained this in terms of their stimuli. So they used infant-directed speech in this study, which is like more exaggerated and had more pitch variation in their stimuli. And they think this might attract Mandarin native speakers' attention to the pitch variation, because there's pitch changes and tonal changes in Mandarin. And they think this might affect their performance. So one possible direction is that they could try the task again using adult-directed speech. Okay, so this study tells us that L2 learners, L2 second language non-native sounds could affect cross-situational learning. And similarly, this study by Tuninetti et al., they also looked at L2 word learning in cross-situational paradigm. This time they trained English speakers with Dutch and Brazilian Portuguese vowels. And here are their stimuli. What they did is that they categorized these vowel contrasts into easy and difficult contrasts based on Escudero's L2LP model. I'm not going to go into this model here because it's a huge theoretical thing. And so put it simple, they think the vowel contrasts are difficult if the two sounds in the L2 map onto only one sound in the L1. And the contrasts should be easier if the two sounds in the L2 can be mapped onto two sounds in L1. So that's how they categorized the contrasts into easy and difficult. And similarly, they used the paradigm with two pictures and two words using minimal pairs and non-minimal pair conditions. So this time they had difficult vowel minimal pairs, easy vowel minimal pairs, and non-minimal pair conditions. And what they found is that perceptual difficulty of the sound contrast did influence L2 cross-situational learning. So as in the chart, for both Dutch and Brazilian Portuguese vowels. The non-minimal pairs were easiest, so they had highest accuracy. And the easy minimal followed by the easy minimal pairs and followed by difficult minimal pairs. All these differences are statistically significant. So, these previous studies have confirmed that there are influences of phonological similarity and non-native sounds in L2 cross-situational word learning. However, if you noticed, they looked at consonant and vowels, basically at the phonemic level. So what about the impact of suprasegmental features? That's what we are interested here. What about tones, like lexical tones in Mandarin? And previous research looked at the similarity between L1 and L2 phonological inventory. But what about the phonological features that don't exist in L1 at all? So English speakers learning Mandarin, they have a tonal cue that doesn't exist at all in their L1. So bearing these in mind, we have our research questions. Firstly, whether and how do non-native sounds, in this specific case, we look at lexical tones, and minimal pairs interfere with L2 cross-situational word learning. And we want to see if learners' non-native sound perception could develop during this cross-situational learning process. So if our paradigm, our cross-situational learning paradigm, could actually help improve their non-native sound perception. This is what we want to know. And we made predictions on this. So we predict that minimal pairs are harder than non-minimal pairs. And minimal pairs that contrast in tones are harder than those contrast in consonant vowels, because that's what they are familiar with. And we expected to see some extent of improvement after cross-situational learning in their non-native sound perception. So our studies are pre-registered here at OSF, and all the materials and pre-registration form and our power analysis for sample size can be found here. And so now I talk about how we did the experiments, so what we did. We had, for experiment 1, we had 2 groups, one English native group and one Mandarin native group as a baseline group. There were 56 participants in total. They were all adults over 18. And specifically for the English group, they had no previous experience learning any tonal language, so tonal cue would be a novel cue to them. And here are the pseudowords. So we had these pseudowords are generated based on Mandarin Chinese. The phonemes we use can be found in both Mandarin and English, so both groups are familiar with these phonemes. But in addition to the phonemes, we add tones. So there is a, as marked in red, there is a tone 1 and tone 4, which refers to Mandarin tone 1, which is a high flat tone, and Mandarin tone 4, which is a falling tone. So we have a consonant set which differ in the words differ in the first consonant, and the vowels vocalic set which differs in the first vowel, so that we can create minimal pairs using these words. And I cannot play the audios here, but I can pronounce it. Like if you can, and see if you can hear the tonal differences. So for this word, we say ba mi, and for this word, we say ba mi. If you can hear the difference on, and the tonal difference falls on the first syllable of the words. One is a flat tone and one is a falling tone. So we want to see how participants perform with these words. And here are the objects. So they learn to map those words with these weird, funny objects taken from the noun database. And I can show you how our experiment actually looked like. So firstly, when you see two pictures and you hear a word, for example, bami. In this case, for example, you hear bami again. Now you might have a sense of what this word means. And then it goes on. This kind of tries. So we present two pictures and participants hear only one sound here. This is slightly different from previous studies because they presented two words, if you remember, in the previous ones. This is because we wanted participants to respond in our experiment. So we play one sound, show two pictures, and we ask them which one is the correct referent. Is it the left one or is it the right one? And they respond. In the very beginning, they were just guessing. And over time, they might learn something and accuracy might go up. So here are our minimal pair conditions. Similar to the previous studies, we have consonant minimal pair, vowel minimal pair, and non-minimal pair conditions. And in addition, we have a tonal minimal pair condition. So the words only differ in the tone, which is more tricky, the most difficult. Yes. So these are our minimal pair conditions. And what we found. So here are our results. The x-axis is the learning blocks. So we have 6 learning blocks. Over time, we want to see the learning trajectory. And the y-axis is percentage accuracy, which is how accurate they are at deciding the referent. So in the beginning, they are at chance level, and we found that there was significant learning effect. So they were above chance after learning. And both groups, so both Chinese and English groups, learned the words. And I have to say, this experiment is very short. It is less than 10 minutes. So in less than 10 minutes exposure, they can learn the words. And here we look into the different minimal pair conditions. This is for the Chinese group, the baseline group. As you can see, they can learn all the minimal pair conditions. And here is one for the English group. So let's compare different conditions and groups. Firstly, we found an effect of minimal pair. So these green ones are non-minimal pair conditions. Accuracies were higher in non-minimal pair conditions compared to minimal pairs. And we found an effect of L1. So in these two, the yellow lines, the yellow lines are the tonal trials, tonal conditions. Only in the tonal conditions did Chinese speakers perform better than the English speakers. And in all other conditions, they performed the same. So this is an effect of L1. And we noticed that our English group remained at chance level for tonal trials after learning. So they didn't improve to an above chance level. And in addition to our cross-situational learning task, we had a debriefing at the very end of the learning process. And we asked participants, did you notice the tone or pitch pattern in the language? If they say yes, we say, oh, they are aware of the tonal changes. If they say no, we say they are unaware learners. And these kind of classification were based on previous research. We are doing this because our previous study found that there was significant differences between aware and unaware learners when they learn grammar and vocabulary, and we want to see if it's the same for phonology. Here's what we found. The red lines, aware learners, and the green one for unaware learners. And we did this only for the English group, because obviously the Mandarin, the Chinese group, they are aware of the tones. And we didn't find significant difference between aware and unaware groups. So being aware of the tones didn't really mean better learning in this case. And that was our experiment 1. Since we didn't find a significant improvement in English learners' performance in the tonal trials, we wanted to know if this is simply because the exposure was too short. It was less than 10 minutes. So we did a follow-up with doubled exposure. That's our experiment 2. So here, materials and procedures are the same, just with doubled exposure. And this time we only had an English native group because Chinese learners already learned in the 10-minute version. So I'm going to skip the materials and procedures because it's the same. Let's look at what we found. So firstly, overall, they learned it. There was significant learning effect. And, so this group was, they learned the L2 words overall. And looking into the different minimal pair conditions, you could actually see a clearer difference in this time. So there is the effect of minimal pair, the non-minimal pairs, consonant vowel minimal pairs, and tonal minimal pairs. There's a clear-cut difference. And this time, English group still remained at chance level for the tonal trials. This tells us that simply doubling exposure, so the exposure didn't really make a difference, no significant exposure effect. And again, we did the awareness testing and no significant difference between aware and unaware groups again. So that's our results. And what they mean is that overall, adult learners can learn the L2 words, which contain non-native sounds, the tones. They can learn them. This supports previous findings I just introduced. And it adds to them because we looked at a suprasegmental, a tonal cue here, on top of the phonemic differences, the phonemic cues. And I'm going to look back to our research questions and predictions. So as for research question 1, we predicted that minimal pairs would be harder than non-minimal pairs, and we found evidence for it. And we thought minimal pairs that differ in tones would be harder than the others, and we found evidence for that. And as for research question 2, we expected learners to develop during the cross-situational learning process, but we didn't get clear evidence for that. So there was no significant improvement in English participants' performance in tonal trials in both experiments. Why is it the case? So we thought that we had only a cross-situational learning task, which involves word learning. So it's a higher level of tonal processing. There could be different levels of tonal processing. It could simply be acoustic level, so people can hear the difference. It could be phonological level, people are categorizing the tones into different categories. And then they have to use these cues to learn words. That's a higher level, even higher level. So there are different levels of that, and we didn't really differentiate between them. So what if we test discrimination before and after? This is what we thought considered a limitation of our study. So learners' vocabulary and phonological development were tested using one single measure that's the accuracy in CSL task. What if we separate perceptual abilities from lexical abilities? Would that make a difference? So in the next experiment I'm running, my experiment 3, I'm going to add a tone discrimination test before and after the CSL, the cross-situational learning task, and see if there's a difference. And another thing is that we only included a perception task here. But now there are studies looking at the perception production link, and we thought it could be a potential direction by adding a production component into the experiment. So, for example, asking learners to imitate the sound after hearing it, would it facilitate learning? This could be a direction. And we have several ongoing experiments, research. So in my experiment 3, which will hopefully start soon, I'm going to look at individual differences. So what we found here is that overall English learners were not so good at discriminating the tonal minimal pairs. But some people did really good. So some people achieved an accuracy of like 80% after learning. And we wanted to know what contributes to the great variance. So what makes some people learn better? And we're going to look at the auditory processing tasks by Saito et al. And we're going to look at memory, short-term memory, phonological short-term memory, and aptitude. So if any of these could explain why some people learn better. And also we have some collaborations using similar paradigm. So we have a L2 Portuguese experiment. So we are teaching people Portuguese pseudowords with Kirsty and Susanna. And we have another study looking at the effect of instructions. So we provide some extent of instructions before learning and see if that helps with learning with Joseph here. So, and in the future, we are planning on comparing online and offline measures. So in this one, we only have a very explicit judgment task. That's offline measures, and we wanted to see if we can capture more implicit learning by eye tracking and brain signals. So that's what might happen in the future. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
Just stopping the recording.